Well, you can call this the Loser Bowl as the Chicago White Sox and Baltimore Orioles face off in a battle of the two worst teams in the American League. And let's discuss why it'd be nice for the Palos to get a series win on today's episode of Locked On White Sox.
You are Locked On White Sox, your daily Chicago White Sox podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, I'm your host, Todd Welter, a lifelong Sox fan and a contributor at SouthsideShowdown.com, part of the FanSided Network. And also I've covered Major League Baseball for outlets such as the Associated Press. And thanks for making Locked On White Sox your first listen every day, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Make sure to hit the like button on today's episode. Subscribe to the YouTube channel at Locked On White Sox if you've not done so already. And also follow or subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. Well, I know I've been preaching wins and losses don't matter this season. Making some progress, though, in the big picture would be nice, and taking 2 of 3 from the underachieving Baltimore Orioles would be a nice thing to see, which I want to discuss in the first segment. Then let's discuss if there should be some pity towards Oriole fans with how bad things have gotten for the Baltimore Orioles. And finally, I want to discuss how disappointed I will be if Grant Taylor and Peyton Pallette are not one of the players called up to replace the injured Miguel Castro in the bullpen. And also, if they're not ready for both to either be one of them to be called up, how the Sox might regret releasing a veteran from the organization. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. All right, so the beauty of the MLB draft lottery is the top 2 teams in the Tankathon standings still get the best odds to win the top pick. And the beauty is the punishment of revenue-paying teams cannot be in the top 10 or the top 9 in back-to-back seasons. So that means the Colorado Rockies are on the same boat as the Chicago White Sox were last season in that they're going to be historically awful, and they will not have a top 9 pick. So the White Sox winning this series actually would not mean much in the grand scheme of things, because if you do go to tankathon.com/MLB, the White Sox and the Orioles are at the top 2. So they will both get the same odds if the season were to end today to win the number 1 pick in the 2026 draft. But let me preface, win the series, not sweep, as the Pittsburgh Pirates are at 21 wins. And they're at the Padres this weekend, so I'm not too confident that they'll, increase their win total. So it would be a win-win if the White Sox win 2 games and the Orioles only win 1. They're both still at the top of the Tankathon standings. We can shake hands and say good game and walk away as friends. So that's why I'm just like, hey, let's just take 2 of 3, maybe not a sweep. And while I do want the White Sox to win more than 41 games this year, I have been preaching to everydayers here that I don't want them to win like they did in 2018, where they didn't lose enough. And that took themselves out of the running for a generational talent like Bobby Witt Jr. or another stud like Adley Rutschman, although he is on the struggle bus this season. And that's a big reason why the Orioles are surprisingly this bad this year. I mean, it's their pitching that's a huge reason, but Rutschman hitting well below the Mendoza line, that's a big reason why this team's on the struggle bus. And I also want to see the White Sox try to win the series to make a statement that things can get better, that they're not the get-right team. But I just still want them to stay in the range to get a great draft pick in a loaded 2026 draft, especially in the top 5. Because remember, we're playing the long game for the next couple of seasons. 2025 and 2026 don't matter. And for the truly optimists that thinks, things could get better by 2026, you're going to, even if they bring up some more of these young guys, there's still going to be some growing pains. There's still going to be, you got to try to find ways to win. That's why I think the first sign of even maybe being competitive for 500 is in 2027. Plus, as we saw coming into spring training, injuries can just wreck everything. That's why it's always be cautiously optimistic. And right now, 2025, 2026, let's play the long game. Let's try to, yes, be fun bad, or at least be, I can watch this team be bad because there's pieces that I can see towards a better day. But to me, everything, these next couple of draft classes, everything should be stacking up to, hopefully, best case scenario, competing for the World Series in 2029 in a brand new ballpark on the 78 with new ownership. That's the dream. And competing for the division and wildcard spots in 2027 and 2028. That type of stuff. and maybe getting a bonus with the randomness of October. But as I discussed on yesterday's show, I would love to see if Andrew Benintendi can get back on a roll to go along with the role Miguel Vargas is on. And then you team up with Chase Mydroth and Mike Tauchman at the top of the lineup to produce a more potent offense. That's another thing that I want to see this weekend. I'm hoping Wednesday's game was not just a mirage, was not just randomness, that hopefully it's the start of something good. And as long as Lenyn Sosa is still making contact with his free swinging ways at the plate, and he is making, he's still finding the open spots in the outfield, that's a fifth hitter to help with the attack. And then maybe Edgar Caro snaps out of this funk too. And suddenly now you got 6 viable hitters. You just got to live with Lenyn Sosa possibly striking out and not always driving the ball, or at least just hitting singles. I mean, he is actually hitting the ball a little bit hard. But still, you'd like to say that, see that, hey, they could have a potent offense, and this is a great way to show. And then maybe Luis Robert Jr. does just enough to hit around 215 to 220. As I'm no longer optimistic he's snapping out of the slump. I mean, June is literally a few days away. And that's when you basically get into the area of now you're having a bad season. Usually after after Memorial Day, if you're still this bad, it's probably you're going to have a bad season. It's not a slump. Usually it's between Memorial Day and Flag Day. I mean, once you get past Flag Day, it's a bad year. It's a bad season. But you got a couple of pieces right now to show that the offensive attack could be something. And the White Sox are facing one of the worst pitching staffs in baseball. Another reason why the Orioles are surprisingly this bad this season. And another reason I hope the Sox can win this series is it would be nice for them to show progress that they're not a get-right team. Because you got to remember, Baltimore's still a talented team. They're underachieving. And they have terrible pitching. That is one of their Achilles heels, is their starting pitchers are bad. But they still have a very potent lineup. A little banged up, but still not one to be, taken lightly. And the Sox, I'd like to still see them continue to battle teams. Not revert to, hey, things are going to get better because we're facing the White Sox. This is a get-right series. They battled the Mets. They made the Seattle Mariners sweat. And the Orioles, they're down right now, so let's keep them down. Have them join you on the couch of the basement teams in the AL. Join us. Like the Simpsons gif. And it would be a nice way for the Sox to start climbing up the ladder while still not completely impacting their tankathon standings. I mean, I'm really convinced that, the Rockies might actually break the White Sox record because they're really, really bad. And they're kind of in the same situation that the White Sox were in that the NL West is really, really good. I mean, there's 4 very, very good teams, kind of like there was 4 very, very good teams last year in the AL Central. So they've got a definite possibility of not only breaking a record the White Sox just set for infamy, but crushing it. So yay. And according to Tankathon, there's still going to be plenty of opportunities for the White Sox to lose enough games to stay at the top of the Tankathon standings, because the Sox do actually have the toughest remaining schedule. So there's going to be some losing, and we've seen it. And actually, the one thing about being competitive, it's nice to see, but man, it can be frustrating because it's like, you're so close. You're so close to at least getting a few more wins. And it is enjoyable. I mean, again, this team has been enjoyable to watch this year. However, I do want them to take advantage of the rare times that you can prove that you're not the worst team in the American League and show things are moving in the right direction with some of these young players getting valuable experience. Basically, I don't want to see regression in this series, and it's a great opportunity for Sean Burke to show he can maintain some consistency and better command. Manager Will Venable, though, is giving him Jared Shuster as an opener, so maybe that can help out. And I would love to see Adrian Hauser have another great start, because if he can keep this pace up for 2 months, suddenly you have a valuable trade chip. And Davis Martin also pitching well. That would be great to see. Well, the Orioles are going through a rough patch, and there's a possibility their contention window could be closing, much like it happened to the White Sox earlier this decade. Let's discuss if you and I should feel sorry for them next on Locked On White Sox. Let's be real. Coffee isn't just a drink, it's a ritual, a lifeline, the thing that helps you get from half asleep to fully functional. I know I can attest to that. And if it's that essential, why settle for anything less than amazing? And that's where Trade Coffee comes in. Trade is the number one coffee destination in the US, delivering fresh, incredible coffee from over 50 of the country's top roasters. Whether you're a cold brew fan or a pour over purist, they've got a roast you'll love. And you know me, I love my coffee, and I'm a big fan of a good dark roast. And after taking the trade quiz, I'm looking forward to trying out the new brands they're sending me because I'm no grocery store coffee buyer. I do like, to spring a little bit for the good stuff. And Trade Coffee has a ton of brands to send you that will help you get going in the morning and also then enjoy throughout the day. And if the first match isn't perfect, Trade will replace it for free until they get it just right. And right now, Trade is exclusively offering our customers 50% off your 1 month trial at drinktrade.com /lockdown MLB. That's TRADE.com /lockdown MLB for 50% off your 1 month trial. And welcome back to Locked On White Sox. I'm your host, Todd Welter. Again, make sure to hit the like button on today's episode and subscribe to the YouTube channel at Locked On White Sox if you've not done so already. And if you can't catch the show on YouTube, Locked On White Sox is available on all major podcast platforms. So make sure to follow or subscribe on places such as Apple or Spotify. Either way, get your 30-minute fix of Chicago White Sox baseball venting with me. All right, so, going back to like 2018, the White Sox and the Orioles have some similarities in both. And actually, I think we've had some similarities going back almost a decade. We can relate to each other. We both have had to endure 3 consecutive 100-loss seasons, with one of them being absolutely horrific. And I'm just assuming the White Sox will have a third straight losing season. And the Sox are even trying to replicate what the Orioles did to get out of their dark ages. They tabbed Ryan Fuller to be the director of their hitting. The Orioles rebuilt through the draft. And we can be a little jealous. They got new ownership. Hopefully the Sox get the Ishbia brothers buying full control at some point, and we can enjoy new ownership. And things did get better for the Orioles as a contention window opened up with that young, promising talent, much like the White Sox had with the rebuild last decade, and much like what the White Sox are now hoping to have by the end of the decade. However, the White Sox at least won 2 playoff games during the contention window that last rebuild, opened up. Baltimore's 0-5 in the playoffs. And things are starting to fall apart much like it did for the White Sox in their last rebuild. It's sort of similar in that not enough moves were made to actually, say that, to complete the rebuild. Although the Orioles had prospects to spare and refused to move them for, cost purposes to get the players that put them over the top, where the Sox just ran out of reinforcements. The Sox just, leveraged a lot of the veteran assets that they had for a lot of promising players, but they never drafted well. And that allowed them to run out of reinforcements, basically. Also, poor team chemistry and terrible managing hires doomed the Sox. Obviously the Orioles just fired their manager, but it didn't seem like, they had a guy that was, where the game had passed them by, or just an absolute fool running the team when they, hired the replacement. Now, this could be a blip, much like what happened to the White Sox 2 decades ago. This could be like the 2007 season was for the White Sox, when injuries and underperformance just ravaged the team. And that's what happened. This could be, a season where just everything that can go wrong will, and that can happen in baseball, and we've experienced this as Sox fans. And my suggestion to the Orioles is do exactly what the White Sox did in 2007. You're sellers with the intention of getting pieces back that can help provide you a bounce back season in 2026. Don't entertain anything that can be in the long term. I mean, you could be sellers like the Tigers were last season, but that is really hard to envision. Baltimore, having a late season bounce back, considering they don't have a pitcher like Tariq Skubal. And also you don't have a team in your division like the White Sox to help spot you some wins in the standings. So I don't think they could be sellers and then maybe still hope for a very talented core to put them on, to maybe go on a hot streak like the Tigers did. Just sell, lose as much as you can to reap a top 5 pick as a bonus potential impact player to be added down the road. That should be, use your top 5 pick to be that bonus player to be used down the road. Otherwise, just try to sell to get as many pieces to bounce back the next season. A full-out rebuild, I don't think is needed yet. But still, hanging on to those prospects when they could have been moved for pieces to put the team over the top is why I can't feel bad for Baltimore. I'm sorry, Orioles fans. Can't feel bad for you. Because nobody felt bad for the White Sox. And especially when it's prospect clutching, because there are these concepts called regression and overvaluing and just not happening. Ask the Cubs how many World Series they could have won had their anticipated potential, had they anticipated potential regression and had a more realistic view of their core and what needed to be added as you kept going. And Keston Herstad is a prime example of the Orioles clutching onto their prospects when he could have easily been moved for a piece to help them win in the now. And he's struggling mightily. And he's only getting at bats because Clinton Cowser is hurt. But Kjerstad could have easily been traded for a piece like, to help the Orioles win in 2023, like, say, Dylan Cease. Just saying. Should have taken an advantage of the unknown rather than let's have him be a possible cheap replacement for Anthony Santander. Now, trading for Corbin Burns was basically the only bold move they made. And that is looking like basically trading for Lance Lynn. Because, and even then, even worse, they made no effort to replace him properly or keep him. They didn't really try. And he was the only effort that they made to try to complete the rebuild. Sort of like the White Sox trading for Lance Lynn was not going to be enough to complete the rebuild. Needed to maybe get that bigger free agent piece. And while you can sometimes feel bad for those that repeat your mistakes, Baltimore should have seen the potential pitfalls. They should have read the room. They should have actually looked at the White Sox and been like, we don't want to be like that. Live in the world of let's thrive on having a great player development system and use that to actually help us get some players over the top rather than, well, we're going to use our great player development system and our ability to draft because it can keep young guys around because they're cost effective and they can be, cost effective replacements. Because again, some guys regress. Some guys just don't develop. And you don't win the World Series with the best balance sheet. And you sometimes don't win the World Series with the best farm system. And you don't win in the AL East by not being aggressive. And that is why I can't take pity on the Orioles. Especially when, man, that fan base, oh man, do they hold to their prospects like they were sacred cows. Maybe that's the biggest reason. I'll admit maybe I got some bias here. And Orioles fans who stumble across this. First of all, this show is intended for the White Sox. But man, as a content creator, next to the Reds fans acting like we were insulting them by suggesting, hey, maybe, you might want to make this deal or this is the cost. Orioles fans were, whoa. How dare you suggest Dylan Beavers for, say, Lucas Giolito and Ronaldo Lopez when the Angels gladly paid the Edgar Carroll price? I'm just saying. How dare you suggest they trade some of these guys because that's the cost. And it's one thing if you have a prospect or two that you think is sacred, that's untouchable. That's fine. Every farm system should have a few guys. You should always have an identified few guys who are going to be core pieces. That unless you get a Godfather offer, they are part of your team. But it's another when you act like the whole system is sacred. As folks, prospects are usually meant to be stars on other people's teams. Even the White Sox, we're probably going to have to, come to the realization that at some point, you want them to obviously have great drafts and great international free agent signings. But at some point, if you want to be competitive, you have to take your farm system from developing a core to actually using it to help you sustain winning. Having a strong farm system should always be a must because, again, it accomplishes two things. One is young players on cheap deals in their peak performance years. Yes, you should have those guys. The other is it's a great resource to acquire talent in trades that put you over the top. Ask the Dodgers. They seem to get it. That's why no prospect is ever really a sacred cow. And, for the Dodgers. And it's why they win with some of the players they develop. but also why they win with the players they acquire in trades and free agency. Kobe Mayo would have been easily someone the Orioles could have moved on from to get Garrett Crochet. Said he's sacred. Oh, we can't touch him. And that is why Baltimore's rotation is a shell of itself. And they're now banking on two guys coming back from Tommy John surgery at some point, rather than having a true ace that maybe could be helping them stay afloat until those guys come back. So yeah, I got some bias here. That's making me hard for me to take pity on them. Well, speaking of young players, the White Sox might have to call up a youngster to replace reliever Miguel Castro, who ESPN's Jesse Rogers is reporting is lost for the season. Let's discuss after the break how it'd be better for Grant Taylor or Peyton Pallette to get the call up, and if it's not, did the White Sox make a mistake releasing Dan Altavilla? Because he could have been a good option too. Let's discuss after the break. Get the supplies you need from the site made for the skilled trades, Supply House. Whether you're in plumbing, HVAC, or electrical work, Supply House is a reliable way to order products online. Their easy-to-use website is packed with helpful resources and the latest product info to help you get the job done right. Plus, with a complete inventory of over 200,000 parts from 400 plus top brands, you'll find exactly what you need, delivered fast from coast to coast. Need help with an order? Supply House offers expert support and industry-leading service, so you'll always talk to a real person. And for the trade pros looking for an extra edge, their free Trade Master program offers exclusive perks like a dedicated phone line, free shipping, and discounts on every order. Thousands of skilled professionals are already taking advantage. Now it's your turn. And I keep telling my brother-in-law in the plumbing business, tell your company to use Supply House with all the advantages they provide to the skilled trades. Join the Trade Master program today at supplyhouse.com/TM and start ordering plumbing, HVAC, and electrical supplies with just a few clicks. Plus, use promo code SH5. That's promo code SH5 for 5% off your first order. That's supplyhouse.com. Welcome back to Locked On White Sox. I'm your host, Todd Welter. Again, shout out to all the everydayers. I appreciate your loyalty. Please hit the like button on today's episode. I recommend your fellow Sox fans or baseball fans, friends, to subscribe to the YouTube channel at Locked On White Sox, wherever they get their podcasts, as this show is available on all major podcast platforms. So just checking the Twitterverse to make sure the White Sox have not called up. Nope, they still have not called up anybody yet. Oh, wait. They have. So, this is the move that they've made to actually replace. So, I'm switching gears, guys, because I just did it. This is the move the White Sox have made. Prior to today's series opener at Baltimore, the Chicago White Sox agreed to terms on a one-year, $1 million contract with right-handed pitcher Dan Altavilla. To make room on the 26-man roster, the White Sox placed right-hander Miguel Castro on the 15-day injured list with a patellar tendon tear in his right knee. So first of all, I obviously would have preferred it to be Grant Taylor or Peyton Pallette, as I was going to talk about. But at the same time, adding Danny Altavilla back to the roster is actually a good move, actually, because I was going to actually touch on, did they make a mistake by letting him go? Because they did release him. Now, I have a feeling now that they've signed him back to a major league deal that he probably had the same type of opt-out that Adrian Hauser had. That, if you're not on the big league roster by then, you have to be, you basically got to release me. You got to let me go out and find a big league job. But at the same time, I was thinking to myself, why didn't then you just put Danny Altavilla, maybe save, again, I don't know what his minor league deal was, probably $1 million, but just put him on the big league roster for a week. And then, if it doesn't work out, you DFA him. And then he can see, hey, there's nothing on the market for me. I'll stay with the organization because he's been pitching well. He was doing really well at AAA Charlotte. Now, his major league numbers are not great. And again, if you're thinking, why are we wasting our time with these veterans? It still can't hurt to give Taylor a little bit more time in the minors to just get an idea of, hey, I got to be on the attack. I would still prefer Peyton Pallette, though, being called up because he's got the velocity. He might be a guy that you can move forward with. But I get the process of them bringing Altavilla back even though his big league numbers are terrible, because he is a low cost, potential high risk or high reward signing. If he does pitch well for the next 2 months, you could flip him. But my faith in that working out right now is not so high, considering every option Chris Getz has tried has not worked out. So, but it's still better than the other alternatives, because James Karinchak was another veteran option, but his velocity is gone. He's not getting to 94, 95. That made him actually a decent reliever. I mean, he's a break glass after breaking the first glass in a case of emergency option. You could be clutching your pearls for Edison Coffee, but he's been shaky his past 3 outings. The only other one that I wouldn't mind have seen them to consider over a veteran is Wickham Gonzalez. He's been good limiting runs at Charlotte, but he is struggling with his command. So I was really hoping that they would finally say, let's see what we got at least Paulette. But clearly, they want to go with a veteran. They want to see if they can get something from some of these veterans at the deadline. And I don't blame them, because they still should be an asset collection. And as everydayers have probably heard me preach, the trade deadline last year was very good to relievers. And I don't see why that would change. Because again, usually relievers, like especially on a $1 million prorated deal, they're pretty cheap. While the Mets and the Dodgers do spend money like a drunken sailor in the offseason, they value a good, efficient contract that could get you something solid. The Phillies too. I want, even if it's just William Bergolla like prospects, yeah, let's bring them in. Because as I discussed, either they can be future core pieces, or they can be players that you could eventually flip for pieces that help you if you're ready to be competitive. Glad that they didn't bring back Caleb Freeman. You got data on him. He's probably not a long run option. The other option that I wouldn't have mind them seeing was Andrew Dahlquist. He's doing well at AA in relief too, so I wasn't opposed to him. But I get what they're doing here with Altavilla by calling him up, or by bringing him back to the organization. And definitely looks like, again, it was kind of probably had to release him because he forced their hand. And then when I don't think they would have brought him back, I would have questioned, obviously, releasing him as a problem had they had Castro not gone down. And that's the other thing. I do feel bad for Miguel Castro. I really do, because it made sense to bring him to the organization. He did have velocity. Houston wasn't using him. Again, nothing wrong with saying, hey, maybe this guy can help us for 2 months. Maybe he can capture something and we can try to flip him for anything of value. There's nothing wrong with that. And even if the Sox had elected to go with Paulette and Grant Taylor, I would have felt bad for Castro, because you never want to see a guy get lost for the year. So that wraps up this edition of Locked On White Sox. Thank you for making Locked On White Sox your first listen today. For your second listen, check out the all-new Locked On MLB Game Night. Every game, every night, all season long. Get local analysis on a national scale. Find MLB Game Night on Locked On MLB on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast. And I'll be back on Monday to go over how the Sox did in this series with Baltimore and do a minor league Monday report. Feel free to leave comments about today's discussion regarding how it would be nice for the Sox to win the series, not pitying Baltimore, and hopefully the team making the right move by bringing in back Danny Altavilla to replace Miguel Castro in the bullpen. You can leave them at the episode page on YouTube, X, formerly Twitter, at ToddJW, or at Locked On Sox, or you can email me at LockedOnWhiteSox@gmail.com. Have a great day and have a great weekend, and I will see you Monday.